Hi, Andrew Cuneo here with another Historic Deck. This time it's going to be a mid-range artifact deck that I'm pretty excited about. A lot of people have tried artifact creature-based strategies in Historic, and almost always I think they go for a kind of a low-to-the-ground aggressive strategy, and that's proven to be not really a particularly good strategy in Historic. This deck's a little bit different. This is much more of a mid-range deck. It's kind of, my inspiration for the deck came from this card, Master Thopterist, which is a card that I think has really been underplayed, at least on arena formats. Maybe that's because there haven't been enough good artifacts, but it's a really powerful card, and most of the deck building choices that went into making this deck are to maximize synergies with this card. So I'll go over the different card choices and kind of some of the general strategy of the deck, and then eventually get into some gameplay. Start at the bottom of the curve. 2 copies of Mox Amber. Really great card if you can enable it. In this particular deck, the cards that enable it are the Emrys and the Size, so not a ton of enabling, but enough that it is quite strong. One thing to note with this card is that it does work with legendary planeswalkers. You get 1 mana of any color from them. There's Karn the Great Creator. That's colorless, so you still don't get any mana from the Mox Amber. If you have Karn in play, you're allowed to tap it, but you just don't get anything out of it, so it doesn't do anything. On to the 1-drops. Esper Sentinel, really great card. Shows up in a variety of Historic strategies. In this particular deck, it's in the deck because it's a 1-mana artifact card that is extremely strong. This is not the deck where it's at its best, but it's still quite good. Portable Hole, one of the better removal spells in Historic, I would say, because in addition to hitting cheap creatures, you can hit cards like Witch's Oven and Trail of Crumbs, which can be really important against Jund Food. You can also hit your opponent's portable holes, which comes up sometimes. It's kind of neat. This is one of the reasons that Psi is so great in this deck, is you can get a lot of really good removal in Historic that is artifact based, so it triggers Psi. Aether Spellbomb is another card that's only been in Historic on Arena. It's a reprint from original Mirrodin, I believe. It's a deceptively powerful card because you can cycle it, but you can also set up situations where you're using your Aether Spellbomb to protect your Emry from removal, or to just bounce your Psi, or to bounce your Thought Monitor. So you can use it a lot on your own creatures. You can cycle it if it's not going to be useful. And you can bounce your opponent's creatures at times, especially if you're up against an aura-based strategy. It can be a really big deal to get their Core Spirit Dancer off the board. Stonecoil Serpent, only a 2 of in this deck. This isn't really a beatdown deck, so you don't need to necessarily curve out with creatures. This card is nice in that it's a curve filler, and it also has 2 pretty important abilities, those being Protection from Multicolored and Trample. One of the important matchups to be good against in Historic is Jund Food, and in particular, this card can cause a lot of headaches for them because their deck is largely multicolored. They're not going to have a lot of answers to it, and if you get it in play, they're not really going to be able to attack you very effectively. That isn't enough on its own to win the game, but it does create a pretty big problem for them, so you can then develop the rest of your strategy to win. Glass Casket, kind of the same thing as Portable Hole, not quite as good of a card, but it does hit Mayhem Devils and all the 3-drops that are kind of prevalent in a lot of Collected Company decks. Mindstone, really great artifact ramp spell, and just another super powerful card. Emry, here's where we start getting into kind of the core engine of the deck. Emry comes out cheaply because the deck's full of inexpensive artifacts, and if you can start recurring Aether Spellbomb, you can prevent your opponent from developing a board. If you start recurring Thought Monitor, you get tremendous card advantage. You can also just get back removal spells, get back Mindstone to dig deeper in your deck. Just great card, key piece of this deck. Metallic Rebuke's an interesting card. There's only 3 copies of it, which a lot of the time in this deck it's going to be 1 mana counter your opponent's spell. But it's not a great card to draw in multiples because you really want to be getting the discount with Improvise with this card. And if you draw a hand of 3 lands, 3 Metallic Rebukes, and 1 artifact, you're just not going to get the discount often enough. Also, this is a mid-range deck, not a control deck. In a mid-range deck, if you're going to play with counters, you're hoping to counter, your opponent's 1 or 2 key cards. You're not trying to stop everything they do. You're only trying to stop the really important things. That's why there's only 3 in the deck. Sai, which I went over a little bit before, but again, it's sort of what the deck is built around. And when I say it's built around it, it's a couple of things. By having a really high artifact count, you're going to trigger this generation of a 1/1 Thopter a lot once it sits in play. Also, you can, sacking it to dig deeper and deeper into your deck is a big deal. You can do things where you sack, if you change your mind about what you want the portable hole on, you can sack it to Sai and then bring it back with Emry, things like that. The more subtle thing that happens in this deck is by making all the 1/1 Thopters, you're really powering up the cost reduction that comes from the affinity and pseudo-affinity. So like Emeria has pseudo-affinity. Generally, by the time Sai's out, your Emery's already going to be down to costing only 1 to cast. But maybe you do need a Thopter or 2 to get it all the way down to 1. The Thopters can be tapped for Metallic Rebuke, which is a big deal. But most importantly is Thought Monitor. Once Sai is in play, any artifacts you cast after that are going to effectively reduce the casting cost of Thought Monitor by 2. Because you're getting the 1/1 Thopter and the actual artifact. And it's pretty common in this deck to get this card down to the point where it's only going to cost 1 or 2 mana to cast, which is a huge deal, especially if you're talking about recurring it with Emry. You can do a play where you have Sai out, you got this down to 1, you cast it for 1, draw your 2 cards. If they aren't good, sack this and sack a Thopter, use Emry, cast this again. So you can draw a tremendous amount of cards with this deck once it gets going. Then, Karn the Great Creator. This is a card that I didn't start with it first, but I think you want it in order to fight Jund Food, because it shuts off all of the opposing Witch's Ovens, and it also prevents them from sacking the food tokens to gain life, which can matter if they're trying to get sacrifice triggers for Mayhem Devil. Also, obviously, there's going to be a Silver Bullet sideboard with Karn of a variety of artifacts. Thought Monitor, like I said, is really good with Sai. This deck is set up to maximize Thought Monitor, which is both a pretty good card and a very fun card. Then we've got the lands. There's 22 actual lands and 1 Emeria's Call, so sort of 23 lands. But if you remember, there's 3 Mind Stones and 2 Mox Ambers. So in a way, we kind of have 28 mana sources in the deck, which is, I think, a reasonable amount. I wouldn't say it's excessive. And you get a fair amount of value from your lands in this deck because there's 4 Blinkmoth Nexuses, and there's a Hall of the Storm Giants. So you've got 5 creature lands, you've got Emeria's Call. So one of the important things in Historic, I think, is to try to get value out of your lands. The good decks all do that to some extent, and 5 creature lands, I think, is a pretty good start to getting value. One card I didn't go over actually is Nettle Cyst, which is another card from Historic Horizons. This is a card that I think people tried in the more aggressive decks and found it to not be that good. But when you combine it with Sai, you're going to have a ton of artifacts in play in a lot of games, and they're going to be evasive, which makes Nettle Cyst really pretty powerful. I've found it to be generally pretty good in this deck. On the sideboard, let's start with the Silver Bullet package for Karn, which unfortunately Arena has spread out all over the place. 1 Grafdigger's Cage, obviously a great sideboard card in Historic. The one drawback of this card in this deck is it shuts off your Emry. One thing you can do, if you get in a spot where you need to put a cage in play, and you still want to be able to use your Emry, if you have a Sai, you can start sacking the cage to the Sai on your turn to draw a card. Of course, then you're going to need to Emry back the cage. But it is a way that you can get a half a card of value, or if you have Psi in play, you're getting a Thopter. You can essentially get a card of value out of the Emry every turn by sacking the cage and the Thopter that came with it. Kind of a minor annoyance that you can work around to a very small extent. Next card's Pithing Needle. Answer to Planeswalkers. Also an answer to Witch's Oven. Those are, I think, the main things you're going to want to needle in Historic. Soulguide Lantern, another graveyard hate card. This is one for, you know, if for whatever reason you don't want to have a cage in play, or you just need to get their whole graveyard all at once. It's good to have an option. Glass Casket is yet another target for Karn. Good removal spell. Same thing with Portable Hole. I guess I skipped over that one. I would say this deck, sideboarding with it is a little bit odd in that you need to leave some silver bullets in the sideboard for Karn, but you're also going to want to bring in some of the cards some of the time. So we'll have to see in the games how I actually navigate that. I feel like I'm still working through how to do it in each situation. But just more removal in the sideboard, basically. Aethersphere Harvester is a good way to get a little bit of life gain. Also against the aggressive creature decks, they're not generally going to be able to punch through this that effectively. And kind of, there's a lot of 1-power creatures in this deck, so Crew 1 is kind of the right size for the deck. Mystic Forge is just a general way to get some advantage if the game looks like it's going to take a while. I thought about having one Paradox Engine in the sideboard to maybe set up for like a Mystic Forge Paradox Engine combo turn kind of situation, but I think that that would be sort of overkill because it would require getting to tutor twice with Karn and then spending 9 mana before you had your engine set up, which I think is a little bit win more. Faithful Absence is mostly a removal spell for Korvald. Korvald out of the Jund Food decks is the main way you lose that matchup. This is not a silver bullet, so obviously this is a card that has to come in from the sideboard for games 2 and 3. One cool thing about this card is it gives your opponent a clue, but if you have Karn in play, they can't sack the clue. That's just kind of a minor synergy that comes up every once in a while. Maze Mind Tome is basically in the same vein as Mystic Forge. It's if you're up against some sort of aggressive deck where you want more card advantage, this is a much better option because it gains you life as opposed to losing you life. Mystical Dispute, answer to the other blue decks. Especially like people who are trying to Torrential Gearhulk Magma Opus, that's something that can go over the top of this deck, so you do want to have counters available to stop that. Second, Nettlecyst. This card impressed me enough that I thought I was going to want to tutor for it some with Karn, so I've got one in the sideboard and it has come up. Sky Sovereign is another silver bullet for Karn. This is a way to kill a Mayhem Devil, which can be quite important. There's also a Glass Casket that can do that, but this is a way if you have enough mana, you can start getting an advantage. Also, it's just a card that if you are able to create enough time that you can get it into play against any sort of creature deck, it's going to win the game almost on its own. Then Meteor Golem, which to be honest has not been very useful quite yet, but I want to have one card in my sideboard that can kill a Korvald if I have a Karn. Maybe that's not going to come up enough and this could switch to being something else, but that's what I've got for right now. So that's the deck. I'm going to get into some gameplay and we can see it in action. Pretty good hand here. And I do appear to be against a Jund Food deck, or at least that would be my guess based on the Gigantha. So, pretty clear keep. It is a little bit awkward having 4 copies of Psi in the deck because you do sometimes draw what's probably going to be a useless second copy. But it's so important for it to be in play for the deck that I think you want to play the full 4. Also, most decks that, if a deck is capable of killing Psi, they will generally attempt to do it. Esper Sentinel's not really at its best against these Jund Food decks. Hopefully I draw a white producing land so I can go Psi plus Esper Sentinel. All right, so they've got one of their more powerful engine draws. I can break this up if I find a portable hole. It's also, well, it's not that mana intensive when they have a Gilded Goose. That was about the worst possible card to draw. Okay. This is one of the more annoying aspects of playing with Sai in Historic, is that the 1 and a blue sack 2 artifacts when your opponent has a Mayhem Devil in play is really not very appealing. This would have been a tremendous card to draw the last turn. Presumably my... maybe my Emry's not going to die. Maybe the Esper Sentinel will probably die here. I'm going to need them to either stumble a little bit on lands, or I'm going to need to find Portable Hole and or Glass Casket pretty quickly. All right, I got a Portable Hole in the graveyard now. That's a pretty big deal. Depending on what happens on their turn, if I'm actually going to get to cast this Portable Hole, probably the Goose is actually the best target for right now. Eventually, I can block. The Sai is going to be a fine creature to block, say, the Mayhem Devil with, because I don't really care if they kill it, given that I have 2 more in play. But for next turn, I think I need the Sai to be in play. So I'm not going to do that right away. I don't want to be in a spot where I have to spend another 3 mana to get Sai into play. I'm not going to catch up on board. Seems like they could have attacked with this Ravenous Squirrel as well, since if they're going to do a sacrifice effect, it's going to grow anyway. I'm going to start out by putting the Goose in a hole. And so right now this would cost 5, but you're going to see once the Portable Hole gets into play, we're going to be down to it costing 3. But I do think they're probably going to do a sack trigger here, which will take out the Thopter, I would guess. And they'll be back up to casting 4, but I haven't played my land yet, so that's fine. If they play a Corval next turn, I probably can't win. Not really sure why they chose to kill the one that doesn't have Summoning Sickness. Or why they chose to let that one live, but I'll attack them for 1, I guess. It's kind of sad for me in that this was, the only card in my hand that does anything, but I can get it back with Emry. So it's not the end of the world. Should probably double block this Ravenous Squirrel. Actually, if they're going to give me the possibility of killing their Mayhem Devil, I'll take it. They do have access to 2 sack triggers because they could sack the Fabled Passage and they can have this Ravenous Squirrel eat this other one, which maybe they're going to kill the Thought Monitor. I don't think this was a very good attack by the opponent. They would have been much better served once they saw my hand of using their 2 sack triggers to kill the Emry. That wasn't... I meant to attack with the Thopter, not the 1/4. Although now I'm gonna... If they attack on the ground again, I will just block the Mayhem Devil with a bunch of my useless artifacts to try to get them to block. Basically, anything I can do to keep them from killing the Emry, I've got to do. Fatal push that. They don't really have a good way to trigger Revolt. I guess they could have... They're going to maybe sack their Squirrel to the Witch's Oven, which they don't seem to be willing to do. It's definitely very awkward that I can't use the one... I can use the one in a blue sack to draw 2 artifacts, but it would kill a bunch of my Thopters or my Emry. So it's really unappealing right now. I could sack a Mind Stone and just draw 1 card. Well, that's a nice draw. Shutting off their Witch's Oven. It's also shutting them off from being able to just sack food for 2 mana, which would allow them to trigger Trail of Crumbs, which they might want to do at some point. I think I'm just going to go get a Glass Casket. Guess I could get Sky Sovereign. Maybe that's better. Well, that's not going to be good enough for them to put up much of a fight. Looks like I'm probably actually going to get the Meteor Golem. Not because I want to kill Gigantha, but just because I want to get my answer to Corvald while I can. All right. Plan kind of came together. So as we saw in that game, Esper Sentinel really not at its best. It ate a fatal push, but that was about it. So I'm going to bring in the Fateful Absences. As I mentioned, it's a card that can kill Corvald. I'm going to bring in the Hole and the Glass Casket. So I've sideboarded in a way now where if I have a Karn out, it's not going to give me access to any removal. But if I have a Karn, I'll be going to get probably a Pithing Needle or Sky Sovereign or Meteor Golem. Would be my 3 primary targets, I would say. It's another pretty good hand. I think I'm going to hold the Spellbomb in my hand for one turn. It doesn't really cost me much. So I'm going to play the Mind Stone next turn, and I'll have one extra mana, which I can decide whether or not I want to play the Spellbomb at that point. I guess this is, by playing this way, I'm preventing myself from having the 1 mana to sack it. But I wanted to see, if I'd drawn a land that turn, it would have been better to hold the Spellbomb. So I could go Psy, get a Thopter right away. Kind of feel like I've cost myself a bit at this point. Right, my deck building out. So I definitely wanted to make my land drop this turn, and by not sacking the Spellbomb on turn 2 to draw a card, I was 1/3 less steep in my deck. I'm definitely putting something in the hole. What's it going to be? I think I'll go after the Ravenous Squirrel. They don't have an efficient way to sack their food right now. And I'm about to play the Karn. So I want them to not have a body in play to potentially threaten the Karn. If they had gotten a cat that turn, it would have gone badly for me. I think I want to play the Karn this turn. And probably just kill food. They're not going to have a haste creature in their deck, I don't think. Got an answer to Corvald. The one disadvantage of killing the food is if they have a second Binding of the Old Gods, I don't get any value out of the Karn. Not a second Binding of the Old Gods, but same thing. They seem to be very flooded. That lined up perfectly. Very fortunate for me. My opponent's probably sad with how things are going. It's another incredible draw. I'll get the Trail of Crumbs this time. They're about to get to the point where they could get a card back out of it. And as we can see, Thought Monitor is yet again costing a single blue mana, which is great. Back up Psy. Not ideal, but not the worst. Kind of want to sack things to Psy this turn anyway, so I might as well do it now in case I draw another Aether Spellbomb. Could also draw a Mox Opal. Or Mox Amber, rather. Yeah. If they had just drawn another land that turn, there's no way they're keeping up with the value I'm about to start generating. I would like to play first. This hand. It's only one land, but it's actually a very explosive hand. I'm going to keep. So this turn I'll play the Esper Sentinel. Next turn I'll be able to play the Mox Amber, which will reduce the cost of the Emry down to a single blue. Assuming the Esper Sentinel's alive, so I'll be able to play the Emry. I probably won't have enough mana that I'm able to cast Metallic Rebuke. We'll have to see what I draw. Drew land, but it's going to come into play tapped. I wouldn't have enough mana to Metallic Rebuke even if I left this untapped. I can only get 2 effective mana. Alright. What do I want to do? Definitely want to play the Mind Stone this turn. The question is, do I want to leave access to Metallic Rebuke? I think that this is a Niv Mizzet deck, so I don't really think I need Metallic Rebuke this turn. So I think I'll just make a 3/3. Attack with the Esper Sentinel. Next turn, at a minimum, I can sack the Mind Stone to draw a card and then Emery it back. This is yet another matchup where protection from multicolored is just great. Usually the Niv Mizzet decks have some number of fatal pushes, but outside of that, they just can't get rid of the Stonecoil Serpent, and it's very annoying for them. Milled 3 Esper Sentinels. 4 Esper Sentinels in the bin. So I have a lot of targets from the Emry, but not a lot of options. If you're not interested in an Esper Sentinel, there's a Glass Casket. I probably don't want to just sack the Spellbomb because I would Spellbomb an Emry in response to a removal spell, I think. Yeah. I want to save the Metallic Rebuke, at least till next turn, to see if they cast a Niv Mizzet. Get a Thought Monitor that time, so a better option. Sometimes it's worth just casting Portable Hole just to have an artifact in play because it's going to functionally be a mana in some situations. Against the Niv Mizzet deck, they have a card called Territorial Kavu, which is very good to Portable Hole. So I'm not just going to do that. What's the casting cost going to be on Thought Monitor? 2, 3, so it's going to be 4. I can't afford to get a Thought Monitor and a Psi in play. I think it's more important to get a Psi in play. So I'm going to go Psi, bring back the Aether Spellbomb. I think I'm just going to play the Portable Hole now. I'm getting a 1/1, and I'm getting a mana reduction on the Thought Monitor. I think if they cast a Territorial Kavu this turn, it wouldn't be that big of a deal. So I have lethal by a good amount. I'll just Spellbomb the Mizzet. Give my opponent access to all the value that they could want. They even have to discard the hand size. Nice. Yeah, I wonder if they have had removal spells in their hand for the Stonecoil Serpent. It's pretty great against their deck. All right, against this deck, definitely want Mystical Dispute because it is countering into Mizzet's pretty important. Glass Casket is not very good. Portable Hull also has very few targets. I kind of like Fateful Absence over the artifact-based removal just because it hits both the Niv-Mizzet and it hits the Territorial Kavu. Also, sometimes that deck has Kaya, the Planeswalker. This can get rid of that. Is there anything else I really don't like all that much? One Portable Hull I think is okay. I could change the Portable Hull to something like a Maze Minder, but this one is much, much worse. I can't even play the Esper Sentinel on turn 1 because of the way Spire of Industry works. Pretty clear mulligan. This hand is not good. But I think it at least has a potential with the right top decks to turn into something. I'll keep it and just pray to draw some cheap artifacts. So they boarded that in, I would guess, because it's an answer to Emry. It's not... It does something against my deck, but it's probably not really worth a card. Also, I guess I only have one Portable Hull in my deck right now, so it's not that easy for me to get off the board. But like I said, I would have to have an Emry in play for it to even be a relevant card. This thing hits really hard and has a pretty useful trigger when it attacks. No, I am not in good shape right now. They decided to stand pat. That's almost always wrong. This will be able to counter Niv-Mizzet if they cast it, and I don't think there's anything else that they're that likely to cast that I would care about. Oh, this is... I thought they'd chosen to shock this into play. It's not a shock land. I wonder if this is really worth including in their deck. There's no way that they have 4 Blood Crypts. It doesn't work with the Territorial Kavu. I could really go for a Stonecoil Serpent. Mox Amber. Well, I'm going to be able to cast one of these next turn, but it seems pretty likely that I'll just die because they'll be able to get it off the battlefield. Suppose I could draw into a land plus a card I could cast. I might be dead already. They could just have 2 Lightning Helixes. Oh, I didn't. I actually needed a land even to be able to cast this. Yeah, I'm doomed. I'm going to draw 2 cards. This is going to be removed, and then I'm just going to get attacked and killed. This is a very anemic hand. Here's my command. Okay. The cards that kept in their hand are better than Fatal Push and Territorial Kavu. Yeah, I'm dead. The territorial combos are really awkward because my cards that answer them do so little against the rest of their deck that I don't feel like I can just play a ton of answers to it. Like I have 3 cards that interact with Territorial Kavu in my deck. I can also potentially counter them, or if I have a Stonecoil Serpent, that can just block them. If I can get a Psy out, and I can just make Thopters, and they become a lot less relevant then. But the Territorial Kavu on an empty board is not a card that's easy for my deck to deal with. I'm just accepting that and hoping that I don't have another mediocre hand that has to face off against the turn 2-1. All right, I got a lot of answers to a Territorial Kavu, or 2 at least. I'm going to just jam this on turn 3, rather than try to save it to get a little bit of value. They don't have that many removal spells that are effective at killing it. They have Vanishing Verse, but the Lightning Helixes don't kill it. The Prismari Command doesn't kill it. Fatal Push doesn't kill it. So they've got some sort of removal spell they're interested in casting. Hopefully it's Lightning Helix and not Vanishing Verse. Seems very likely that the card they have in their hand is Lightning Helix. So I'm going to play this and I'm going to plus it. Keep it out of Lightning Helix range. And then next turn I'll get something. I think they can't Vanishing Verse this either. Maybe they can double Lightning Helix it. That'd be a little sad for me. Yep. All right. Give them some more options of things to go after. Hit 0 artifacts. I was hoping to hit 2 artifacts, so they couldn't just eat one with the Colossus. Instead I hit 0. Really not good. Somehow I've got them down to 18 already, even though they played 2 Lightning Helixes. It's almost hard to believe. I would like a treasure, please, or a clue, I guess is what it's called. Alright, I hit 2 artifacts that time. That's nice. It's not good. I could have potentially sacked my clue and tried to draw a Mystical Dispute, but I'm drawing to a 2-outer and kind of need the clue. Because it's effectively producing mana for me. Still not choosing to get mana off of the Klothys, which I do have a bunch of lands, which I'm going to take to mean that their hand is substantially lands. Maybe it's not. We draw a lot of lightning helixes this game. Not good for me. This one may have gotten away from me. Do have a good, these are at least good cards to potentially get back in the game with. I can't counter the Niv Mizzet on the way back down, which really isn't a particularly great play. But it's what's available to me. The Niv Mizzet was going to deal damage way too fast to just let it be in play. I'm gonna go get the Meteor Golem just because it can kill Niv Mizzet. Eventually I could maybe, I can get a card that gains life out of my sideboard. I could get the Mazemind Tome or the Aethersphere Harvester, so it's not 100% dead to the 4 turns of Klothys, but it's not looking good. I don't have a Relic of Progenitus in my sideboard because it doesn't work very well with Emry, so I can't just get rid of the graveyards. If I could actually turn the corner, I do have Hollow Storm Giants in play, which will kill my opponent pretty fast, but takes most of my turn to activate it, so that's not ideal. Okay. I'm going to start by sacking this, just to see if I draw an answer to that thing. Alright, I did. It's not a permanent answer because they can just go and get... They can destroy it with Vanishing Verse. But it is something of an answer. I think I'm going to go get... Do I have time for the Mazemind Tome to flip? Just barely. Problem with getting the Harvester is I think it just doesn't do enough for me. I need to not just avoid dying to the Colossus. I also need to start getting close to winning the game. Still not exiling land. I think they're all in on the idea that the Colossus is going to win them the game. And it might. They didn't even leave enough mana up to Vanishing Verse the Portable Hull, which is pretty nice for me. Let's start out by drawing a card. Not that worried about getting burned out because they've already used, I think, 3 Lightning Helixes and a Prismari command. That's, I would guess, the majority of the reach that's left in their or the majority of the reach that's in their deck. They certainly have a 4th Helix, and they could easily have another 1 or 2 Prismari commands. But hopefully they don't have them in their hand. Hopefully it's just all Niv Mizzets from here on out. With all their mana untapped. I think I do not like that. Nine mana, it costs effectively 6 to animate the Hall of Storm Giants and try to block with it. I think I should not play to do that. I'm just going to animate this Mind Stone, which I will probably block Territorial Kabu and sack. This doesn't tap to do, so that's fine. Yet again, they didn't use Vanishing Verse. I guess they just weren't interested in making an attack into my Mind Stone. Well, that makes no sense to do. at that point. Definitely need to gain 4 life, but should I spend the mana on drawing a card? Seven. I think I shouldn't. I think that's fine. This may be the point where I turn the corner. I'm going to be putting the Nettle Cyst on the Aethersphere Harvester on my turn just to gain more life. So I don't really care what the result of this combat is, but I might as well make an effort to kill the Artorial Cobbler. It doesn't make very much sense to block with the Thopter. For some reason I thought that thing was a 6/6. Didn't wind up hurting me, but also made no sense at all. So if I want, I can animate this with the Karn. Does it lose its abilities? No. I don't know that there's any point to wanting to do that, though. I'm going to play a second Karn in my other main phase. Alright, it's a nice cushion of life I built up.
Some solutions must be built. Evil must not be tolerated.
Let me go get another Nettle Cyst.
My allies are counting on me.
Could I have killed them that turn if I'd gotten a second Nettle Cyst right away? 4 to play the second Karn, 3 to play the second Nettle Cyst, 4 to equip it twice. I might have actually been able to kill them. That line didn't occur to me until I went and got the second Nettle Cyst. Seems kind of unlikely to matter. I suppose that they could now, like, they could find a Prismari command, maybe. Okay, they found a Prismari command. That's not going to be enough to kill me, but if I had, yet again, put the Nettle Cyst on the Aethersphere Harvester, it would have been enough for them to live. This They should have put that in their hand and played it at instant speed. It would have at least made things a little hard for me. Poor Meteor Golem. He's hung out in my hand for so long and has never gotten to do anything. I'll let Sai strike the killing blow. This is a Sai deck after all. Alright, that was a good game. I think that maybe the opponent made one or two missteps, and I definitely got a little bit lucky that I didn't just die to that lightning helix. That was a deck in action, though. I hope you guys enjoyed it. I think the deck is pretty good. I'm not sure that it's one of the best decks in Historic, but I'm not sure that it's not. So if you've got the wild cards, give it a try, I guess.